Welcome to this video tutorial. In this video, we will talk about developing your first virtual reality app for Windows Desktop using Unity. We will cover SteamVR, NewtonVR, and VRTK as 3 different frameworks that can help you kickstart your development efforts in virtual reality. Each is available for free on the Unity Asset Store. We will look at the demo scenes provided with each of those frameworks to see what kind of functionality they provide and how they compare to each other. Lastly, we will use another environment and try to implement one of these frameworks in that environment. For that, you could simply go to the asset store and find any free asset or anything that's available. For example, some of the demo projects from Unity. However, since those are really built with certain interactions in mind already, it might be a bit harder to implement virtual reality there. For example, the 3D game kit, you would have to remove all the third-person camera system and replace it with a virtual reality setup. It would be really nice to get the Book of the Dead working, which is the really beautiful environment that was just recently released. However, it uses the HD render pipeline, which does not support virtual reality as of July 2018. So to save you some time, the Book of the Dead won't work with virtual reality for now. Instead, I opted to go with what is called here the post-apo cartoon environment. It's really just an example that I had available, but you feel free to just use anything you have available, or create your own just by using some primitive objects just so you can move around. Alright, let's get started in Unity, and let's set up our development environment. First, I already installed SteamVR on my computer, and I have an Oculus Rift connected as well. Now you can already see that SteamVR and Oculus Rift work together quite well, which means there's a lot of compatibility. You could use SteamVR for a lot of different headsets, and then publish later on to Steam. That's not a problem at all. And it really mostly depends on what kind of platform you want to publish in later, whether you want to publish with Oculus, for example, or whether Steam is the better choice for you. And that's really a decision you have to make. We'll be using SteamVR for this tutorial. Alright, first thing you need to do is check the platform that you have set. This is a brand new project. The only thing I imported is the apocalyptic environment. So everything is set to default PC, Mac, and Linux, and that's what we will actually need. If you're publishing for mobile VR, you would have to choose either Android or iOS, depending on your device. And if you're publishing to Windows Mixed Reality, Universal Windows Platform is your choice. Next, we go to Player Settings, and there, under PC, Mac, and Linux, we have XR settings, and we simply need to check Virtual Reality supported. In my case here, this already comes pre-populated. We will simply need OpenVR because that's what we will use for SteamVR. That's basically all we need to do for now. We can already use this empty scene and just see whether something works. Now when I play this, I can already control the camera through my headset. So Unity really makes it easy out of the box to already get started. And that the camera tracking for a headset is already integrated in Unity without doing anything else. It's simply just a normal camera without anything else attached. So that's great. Now, what we would need is some kind of interaction. So supporting controllers, interacting with objects, and teleporting around or moving around in the environment. And for that, we need one of the 3 frameworks. So let's get started in the Unity Asset Store. And let's import NewtonVR to start with. It is available for free. We simply import or download first if you don't have it. Alright, let's have a look at NewtonVR. We click on Example. And down here there's the NVR example scene. You can see there's an assortment of different objects and interactions. It's sort of like a small playground where you can test out the different functionalities. At the top we have the NVR player, and this is where all the functionality sits. At the very top here, you see there's install SteamVR and install Oculus SDK. That is pretty much the same both for NewtonVR and for VRTK, that they both work with either Steam or Oculus, so you're really flexible with it. In our case, we will install SteamVR. If we click this button, it will take us to the Asset Store, to our SteamVR plugin. And since the SteamVR plugin is a complete project, we simply have to acknowledge that we want to import it. Once SteamVR is installed, this little settings window is going to come up, and it says default is full screen, and it recommends us to set this to false. We click OK, and we can close this. Alright, now with the SteamVR plugin installed, we can go back to our scene and check up here. The button is gone to install SteamVR. Instead, we have to click Enable SteamVR. And this is all we need to do. Now we can already publish this. We can build the application, click on Build, and just select a folder and build the application. Next, we will check out the SteamVR test scene. In SteamVR, we might be tempted to just click on Scenes, but this is the wrong scene, so instead we need to go to Interaction System, Samples, Scenes. And there the interactions example here contains all the different functionalities and some really neat mini-games. Here we don't really need to do anything, we simply can go to Build Settings and again build this scene. Now once we have NewtonVR and SteamVR examples built, we now go to the Asset Store and download VRTK. Alright, those shader errors are from our post-apocalyptic scene, but we also have 2 error messages from VRTK. Now I'm not sure whether this is because I'm using Unity 2018.1.7, but we will have to deal with this somehow. We'll simply open up the script in Visual Studio, and unfortunately this would probably already scare some people away and probably get them to not use VRTK for this very reason. However, I just want to deal with this quickly so we can actually get VRTK up and running. And I hope in a future version that this problem is going to be fixed. So here, we simply need to create a new texture. So what we'll do, instead we'll create a material. And we need to specify an original material. And since we already have a reference here to material, we'll use this and just create a clone of it. And here, instead of using this new texture, we will use the newly created material and use its main texture. Now, I really have no idea what this material is and why we need it, but I simply just want to get this out of the way so we can actually use VRTK. You could also just comment this out and just hope that everything works as well, but in our case, this is what we'll do. And our error goes away, and now we can use VRTK. Let's go back to our project. And under VRTK, we have a folder called Examples. And here there's a long list of different functionalities. Unfortunately, there's not one scene that contains all the different features and all the different things to try out as it was in NewtonVR. So you really have to go into each of these scenes and see whether it's anything exciting. I will simply go into climbing falling, which is really nice. And we will also look at grabbing objects with joints. And then some sort of teleporting tutorial. This one is with terrain. And we can use any of those. For example, teleport by model village. Either way, just choose whichever you want to test. And then we open it up and can simply build whatever example we choose. So again, just once you have it opened up, we can just build. Build settings, build. And off you go. Now, if we just have a quick look at this scene here, if we go to the SDK manager, you already see that there is a simulator, which means you can actually use this in the editor with the mouse. And we have SteamVR also enabled. And this is because we installed SteamVR plugin earlier. However, if you did not use NewtonVR or have not installed SteamVR yet, then you would have to go to the Unity Asset Store and then simply install SteamVR. Now, there is no button here to already guide you to the SteamVR SDK. Instead, you would have to manually go there and install it. Now, since that already has been done, simply build the application, and then we have our scenes, our demo scenes that we can test out. Before we try all the different scenes, I now want to go to the post-apocalyptic environment and just simply show you how easy it is to set up one of these frameworks in an existing scene. For that, we go into Demo and Demo Scene. Now remember, this could be any environment that you already have available. It doesn't really matter. There's no specific requirement. I will briefly talk about sort of what kind of things you need to look out for, but overall, it's really simple to enable it in just about any environment you can find. Here we have a city with a camera, lots of objects here in the environment, and a directional light. Let's zoom in on the camera by selecting it and pressing F. And we zoom in, and we basically start here at this street corner. Now, we can remove this camera since we will not need it. Instead, we will be using NewtonVR. In NewtonVR, we click on the main folder, and further down we have the NVR player. And we simply drag and drop it into the scene. And already we could start using NewtonVR here. Now, remember we have Enable SteamVR checked and installed, of course. And then we have a number of settings here, for example, canvas input and other things. Interaction style is hold, so that means that you have to actually hold the button, any of the buttons that you choose on your controller, instead of toggling, so that if you let go of your button, let's say it's the trigger button, then you would drop the item. So this is actually, it feels quite intuitive, but this is up to your preference. Now one thing we want to do is we want to interact with some objects. So let's use one of these, for example this garbage bag here. We'll make it a little bit smaller. Now we have to make a few changes to the object so that we can use it with VR, pick it up and move it around. The first thing we need to do is I just removed the collider here because we want a mesh collider so that we can actually grab it here by the top. Now let's look up what the mesh looks like. Simply go to the object here, and it's called Polysurface 1044. Okay. So we go back to the parent object, and we drag and drop this garbage object in here. We'll actually use the LOD one, so the less complex mesh, and this is now our collider. The next thing we need to add is a rigid body. Let's set the mass to something like 5, because it's a fairly large object. And now we add the script NVR interactable item. This is the one that we need to actually pick up the object with our hands. Okay. Now you could attach different actions here, Unity events to on-begin interaction, on-end interaction, for example, to increase the score or something like that, or enable some sort of other thing once you pick up like a key or whatever you like your interaction to be. Now the last thing we need to do is we need to remove the static check up here so that the item is not static anymore and we can actually move it around. One last thing, we make this a convex mesh collider so that we can actually grab it properly up at the top here. And it should be all we need to do for this object. We duplicate it, that we have multiple objects to play around with. Now remember, our play area will be something like this here, and we need to move those objects close enough so we can actually grab them without teleporting. And teleporting brings us to the next point. We want to be able to move around the whole environment here. So let's see how we can do that. Let's go back to our NVR player, and let's open it up, and here we have 3 objects: head, left hand, and right hand. Let's use the right hand for teleportation, and we can add component and see what options we have. If we type teleport, we have some SteamVR items here that are about teleporting. We will simply use the SteamVR teleporter script. Now this is a very simple script that doesn't have a lot of functionality, it's just very basic. The NVR example teleporter I actually cannot get to work. I don't know what it is with the script, but it doesn't work for me. But with the SteamVR teleporter, we check teleport on click. Then we have 3 different ways to teleport around. We can either use the terrain as an object to teleport on, but this scene here doesn't contain any terrain. We can use colliders, or we can simply use the height of 0, so that we're always at ground level. Now since we have a lot of colliders here, so on the sidewalks for example, there is mesh colliders, and we can use colliders to teleport around. Now that's a bit awkward because there's also colliders to all those buildings, so theoretically we could teleport anywhere we want, which makes it a little bit tricky and we could get stuck somewhere. But that's something that we could extend this teleportation script for. So we could, for example, add a list of colliders that we only want to interact with. There's also no visual feedback about this collision, so there's no arc or no like laser pointer coming out of your controller. So this is a bit unintuitive, and I have to say that overall with NewtonVR there is no good option for teleportation. This is really where VRTK and SteamVR shine. They really have good teleportation options, but we'll get to that later when we actually test all of those environments. All right, now what is left to do? Now that we have our teleporter set up here and we can just teleport around, I just want to highlight one thing, and that is some of the environments that you might encounter might not be really suitable for virtual reality. And I chose this one here specifically because this is one of such environments. It is really nice to look at, and it is not really optimized, but since virtual reality usually requires a fairly beefy computer, it still runs quite well on my laptop. But when you look at all those different objects here in the environment, it's called garbage, and it really is just one object. So all those different bottles are one object. And unless you really want to go in and open this up, open those FBX files in a 3D modeling application, you're really stuck with all these grouped together objects that you cannot really interact with. Now, in a proper VR environment, I would expect to walk around here and pick up these bottles and move all these things around, maybe be able to open the door of this car. But again, all of these models are simply individual objects. So we have tires and the main chassis of this car, all one object. So that's really not a good setup for virtual reality because anything you want to interact with needs to be a single object. So if I made this interactable, you would pick up the whole bunch of items here instead of being able to pick up each one individually. And that is really one thing to consider. So if you have an environment, for example, I have a project with a virtual kitchen, and in the kitchen I want to open all of the cupboards and all of the drawers and so on. So all of these things have to be modeled individually in order to make them interactable. And that really contributes a lot to making it feel intuitive and making it feel like you really are interacting with a real environment. And that makes it really a fun and engaging experience. So when you choose your environment, make sure that the items that you actually have in the environment are individual objects and are modeled accordingly so that you can properly interact with them. And that is really the main advice I can give you when you choose some environment to use for VR. And once that we have that out of the way, I still want you to be able to see what this looks like when I'm teleporting around in there. So let's build this. Wait, there's one thing left. We actually have to go to Edit, Project Settings, and Quality. Now, the default setting for me for this new project was Fastest Quality setting. And this will actually not work because in Fastest, the rendering distance will be really low and we will only be seeing a few items in our immediate environment and the rest of the level will be completely empty. So what we need to do is we simply set the default to beautiful or fantastic. Now you can also do this when you start up your application. By default, the quality settings will not show up when you start your executable file later, but if you double click on the executable while holding Shift at the same time, you can then also choose your quality settings with any Unity application. However, we simply set fantastic as a default, and the application will work the moment we start it up. Alright, this should be all for now. We go to File, Build Settings, and we build this environment as well. And then we can try all of these different projects and see how they compare when we test them out with our HTC Vive. Here we have the SteamVR demo scene, and already you can see the teleportation functionality. We can aim with this arc towards teleportation locations, which is probably the best functionality out of all those three frameworks when it comes to teleportation. We can interact with Unity UI, and we can pick up objects and throw them. This feels quite natural. We can also push other objects out of the way, but only if they're also interactables. Here we cannot intersect or we cannot collide with other colliders in the scene. And we can also not stack objects on top of each other and expect that physics work with all of them. So that's a big downside compared to the other two frameworks. This is an attachment to the controller. Then it resets once we let go. The next one here is a linear drive. So like a lever pushing back and forth. Next up is a circular drive. And here you can see an area for teleportation, so you can actually choose where you want to teleport to. And this example is probably the coolest of them all, and it's very similar to the archery game that comes with the HTC Vive with the lab. That's a lot of fun, and definitely worth trying out. Next up, we have NewtonVR. This little playground really gives the opportunity to just interact with all those different items, push all the levers, and test out all the functionality that NewtonVR has to offer. It's a lot of fun, and I definitely can recommend it for everybody. You can throw objects, you can push other objects aside, and you can stack objects on top of each other and still expect everything to work accurately according to physics. This is really a big plus compared to SteamVR. Now, as you can see, that object here, that console, is just a collider object, and we cannot intersect with it. Collisions work appropriately. Also, our controller cannot go through any of those objects, so we have a lot of accurate physics that really make it feel very smooth and intuitive. And from a physics perspective and the way that everything collides, I would say NewtonVR is hands down the best option for all three frameworks. There's just no comparison. Even though many of the functionalities from VRTK are fairly similar, any physics collisions really feel the best with NewtonVR. Lastly, NewtonVR also has a collision sound framework, so whenever you have two objects collide or you drop an object, you can play realistic sounds to make your VR environment feel even better. This next demo is VRTK with the climbing and falling scene. This is a lot of fun as long as you're not afraid of heights and are not prone to have simulator sickness. You can attach to a number of points, and you can climb up all the way to the top of the structures. You have free teleportation, so you see a little arc that I use to teleport around. And then you can simply pull yourself up. It feels a bit weird since you're not actually pulling your body up, but it's still a very nice experience. You can see you can attach with both hands to one of those items and then basically pass control over from one hand to another, just like you would if you were actually climbing. Now, being able to fall down is usually something that an unexpected user probably feels fairly uncomfortable about, so it's probably something that you should be very mindful of and possibly avoid. The next scene is for attaching two objects with a joint. So you can see here this is like a morning star. And we have a number of other objects that are simply attached through a joint that you can interact with. This is probably the closest example scene to NewtonVR, even though there is much less things to play with. Now there's a lot of different settings that you can change in order to better manipulate objects, but overall I still feel that NewtonVR is the better physics interaction altogether. Though I have to say those examples here are quite a bit of fun. For example, the fire extinguisher. You use both controllers and you hold the fire extinguisher and the nozzle in both of your hands and interact with it. This next scene is a brief example of teleportation and what the different teleporters, teleport locations, and enabled and disabled teleport locations look like. Now here I would definitely say that SteamVR looks the best and looks the most polished, but the functionality is pretty much the same between SteamVR and VRTK. NewtonVR, on the other hand, really is lacking in terms of teleportation at this point. This last example for VRTK shows item interactions, picking up items, and interacting with those items and their environment. Now there's different modes of picking items up, either with the grip or with the trigger button on the HTC Vive controller. Both feel fairly similar. Interactable objects can push each other out of the way, and you can stack them on top of each other with the expected result in physics interaction. And you have the choice of whether objects should intersect with other colliders, or simply go straight through them. This one, for example, cannot be pushed through any collider surface. This last example is our NewtonVR environment using the post-apocalyptic scene. As you can see, we can pick up our trash bags that we set up earlier. We can pass them on from one end to another, and they collide realistically with any of the collision objects in the scene. We can teleport around using the right-hand controller and the trigger button. I will spare you with me teleporting around a lot, but as you can see, we have not put any restrictions on teleportation, so I can teleport on top of objects. To conclude this tutorial, I would like to summarize that with SteamVR you probably get the most polished experience right out of the gate, because you can use things like teleportation and the archery example as they were used in the lab. NewtonVR and VRTK provide a lot more functionality and are very similar when it comes to using linear drives and different buttons and interaction with Unity UI. However, NewtonVR provides the better physics interactions and also a collision sound framework, while VRTK overall has just more content. Both frameworks are really useful, and I can only recommend really trying out all three, SteamVR, NewtonVR and VRTK, to build your own opinion and really experience what it feels like to interact with one of those examples. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, please leave a comment below. See you next time.